Good afternoon, my name is Benjamin, and welcome to another video on the U.S. history. And today we're talking about Shays Rebellion. And to be quite honest, Shays Rebellion is somewhat just not interesting. I know, it's kind of like, wait, every history teacher says this is what led to the Constitutional Convention, and somewhat true, but also not entirely correct. The reason why is because many in the United States at the time already viewed the Articles of Confederation as extremely weak. And there was going to be, at some juncture, a call to gather and rewrite the Articles, or maybe even write a brand new Constitution. That said, Shays Rebellion probably pushed that date a little bit closer. So, what happened? Well, this was economic, and it was a tax rebellion. In some ways, it was a tax rebellion. What basically happened was that in small rural towns in central and western Massachusetts that were far away from the urban center of Boston, hard currency was very hard to come by, very difficult to come by. So most people out in that area would barter. They ran off of a barter economy, and guess what? It worked for them. Somebody said, whoever in the town was the pig farmer would, raise their hogs or their chickens, or people would raise whatever livestock they might need, or a little bit of fruit, vegetables, grain, that sort of thing. And they would trade it to others who would give them something of equal value in return. For example, shoes or clothes, maybe horseshoes or a new knife, stuff like that. But unfortunately for them, and of course most of their value was in their land. Now, unfortunately for them, out on the coast in places like Providence and Hartford and New Haven, as well as some of the coastal towns, New York, I'm talking about city, not state, and Boston, basically places where you would trade, where you had international trade going on. Merchants out there would want hard currency because that was easier to trade internationally. And so eventually, at some point, they decided, no, we have to have hard currency only. Well, okay. And they wouldn't accept someone saying, hey, I'll give you these goods for these goods. Now, the Massachusetts governor at the time was John Hancock, and he didn't require taxes be paid in hard currency, which was good for farmers and good for people out in the woods and the hills and beyond the Boston area. But at the end of the day, these people still had to deal with the merchants. And the merchants eventually, when they did get to these towns, they eventually said, no, we need hard currency. And so these people who didn't have hard currency to begin with found themselves unable to pay any debts for goods they needed. Of course, they would also buy on credit. every now and then so that, when times were hard, they could still live, but when times were good, they would pay it back. Unfortunately, they couldn't pay their debts now, if they had any. And so, eventually, these merchants would drag them into court and seize their property in lieu of hard payment. You can figure out why people in these areas would be pretty upset. Because to them, it would seem the entire system is there just to bury them, for lack of a polite phrase. And despite the governor basically saying, listen, y'all have to actually be kind to these people because they feed you. Despite him trying to do the best he can, Hancock eventually said he resigned. Now, he cited health reasons, though some historians speculate that he didn't want his name attached to this monumental failure that was brewing. So, what happened then was that James Bowdoin became governor, and he reversed a lot of Hancock-era policies. And he started aggressively going after back taxes, and started pushing aggressively for the punishment and even imprisonment of debtors, and drafting bills that would suspend what was known as habeas corpus, to the point that some people who were noted conservatives back in their day, such as John Adams, conservative for the era, right? John Adams were known to have basically said, you're pushing it a bit far there, effectively. And eventually, this was going to lead to problems. So, a few of these rural people, Daniel Shays among them, who wound up having his name attached to the whole thing, they started gathering and protesting. Most of the time, it was peaceful, and only in one incident did fire actually erupt, and even then, it was only a handful of shots. It was not what you would expect, right? Anyway, they would organize protests outside of courthouses or even shut them down. The only time they actually went after anything was when a bunch of them decided, yes, we're going to go take over Springfield Armory and overthrow our state government. And the federal government, the government of the United States, couldn't raise an army to go address this internal threat, which some saw as one of the big weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. Massachusetts took it upon itself to solve the rebellion, and it was solved pretty quickly, with the state militia and privately paid for militias. However, at the end of the day, the governor of Massachusetts, Bowdoin, at this point, he was extremely unpopular in rural areas and was not very well liked. So when the next election came up, John Hancock was elected again. And we'll talk about the Constitutional Convention next time, but a lot of people do attribute Shays Rebellion to pushing a lot of people saying, yes, we finally need to do something about the Articles of Confederation. Because the U.S. government's response was extremely lackluster. However, my personal opinion is that Shays Rebellion is overhyped. Did it have an effect on whether or not a constitutional convention happened? Yes. But was a constitutional convention going to happen anyway? Eventually, yes, it was. Because the debate was already in the air. However, one thing that is pretty easy to determine is that Vermont got its statehood because of Shays Rebellion. Because it turns out Vermont was functioning somewhat effectively as a quasi-independent nation. And they were able to successfully harbor some of the leaders of Shays Rebellion and were able to demonstrate that they were quite capable of functioning on their own. So much so that New Yorkers, who maybe were more sympathetic to New York's claims over what is now Vermont, including Alexander Hamilton, said, y'all done very good. We're going to back off our claims because you're going to cause problems for us in the long run if we try to keep you. So Vermont may owe its existence as a state to Shays Rebellion. Anyway, I'm going to end the video here. Likes, comments, and subscriptions are greatly appreciated, and I thank each and every one of you who has subscribed already. Like I said, next time we're going to take a look at the Constitutional Convention and talk about what eventually came out of that. We won't talk about the Bill of Rights because that comes later. Anyway, take it easy, y'all. Have a very nice day. See you next time.